It's my pleasure to be here along with Courtney. It's both a pleasure and a privilege to have someone as experienced as Courtney coming here to support our case at OriginTrail, just to shed more light as to what are the practical benefits of blockchain within a very, very important human activity called supply chains. Supply chains encompass 2/3 of the world's GDP, so that's kind of a lot, and we hold that near and dear to us. And we're going to be structuring this presentation in two parts. The first part, boring, I'm going to take that one so we can feel free to sleep over those 10 minutes. And then the other one, more exciting, from Courtney Soulsby of the British Standards Institution, going more into details as to how healthcare that won't fail is based on transparency in pharma supply chains with blockchains. We're going to be talking about the concrete and actual implementations of blockchains, not only in pharma, but also in other supply chains. Fun fact, 40% of all the imports to the United States are already being secured by blockchain on the OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph. And OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph is world's first decentralized knowledge graph, organizing assets, world's most important assets, making them discoverable, verifiable, and valuable. And of course, important assets are also based in supply chains. And there's a very interesting saying by this very smart fella that we cannot solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. And many of the problems in supply chains actually stem from the fact that we're trying to solve the problems in supply chains in a traditional way, in a centralized way, without considering that supply chains, as a matter of fact, are not chains, are not linear, they're networks, so it's much more complex. And it's a pleasure to be here amongst builders and supporters of the Polkadot ecosystem, and we're proud that we have managed to secure a Polkadot parachain that will be landing, our OriginTrail parachain will be landing on Polkadot relay chain on June 4th. So we're very excited about that. So just going back to what Web 1 brought us, we were able just to read information, so that those were very rudimentary beginnings. And then something somewhere went into a very peculiar situation when in Web 2, companies, bigger conglomerates started to essentially take the value that we create as humans on the internet and essentially appropriate it. And in the Web 3, the promise is that we will be able to regain ownership over the value that we create. And essentially what Web 3 is bringing not only the functionalities of reading, writing, but also owning. And why ownership is important, also in supply chains, ownership brings value. So assets bring value. And ownership, most importantly, it brings accountability. And there is no transparency and trust if people, if organizations, if individuals are not accountable for their actions. And Web3 assets that we can now see within the Web3 space, we can see them as like just the tip of the iceberg. What we see now happening with the Web3 asset, and what exactly is a Web3 asset? Web3 asset can be just about any asset. It can be information that is made tradable by using the technique of NFT, and of course, the information itself needs to be connected, needs to be made discoverable. This is what OriginTrail does. It can be your watch, your physical item. It can be an attestation certificate. What BSI is doing, BSI is the leading organization in the world providing ISO standards and also providing training certificates, audit training across the globe. And all of these data footprints, information footprints, essentially represent Web3 asset. And this is where all of these lies. And it's a tremendous potential that we're not only going to see in the future, but we're already seeing to unveil in front of our eyes. So essentially bringing any kind of asset into the Web3 space, either digital native asset or physical item, is what OriginTrail cares about. So how OriginTrail functions, OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph is not blockchain per se. We took the technology that's being used by Google, the knowledge graphs that are powering linked data and essentially making information discoverable, and we overlaid it on blockchains. Initially, when we started in 2016, 2017, we used the available opportunities that we had. We used Ethereum. And of course, Ethereum has certain very good features, but also has certain limitations. And before Ethereum, of course, we had Bitcoin. So I'm going to again borrow what Dan Reeser of Gala said. If Bitcoin was chapter 1, Ethereum was chapter 1 or 2. Now Polkadot is chapter 3 because of so many important advancements that it brings. Besides a very apparent one, so scalability without sacrificing decentralization is a very important one. In the future, not the distant one, we can see that once Polkadot is fully deployed with many parachains running on it, one of the most important value propositions is the value of the network effects that we can reap in the following not years, perhaps even months, when we start connecting with parachains. And OriginTrail parachain is going to land on Polkadot's relay chain on June 4th. So we're very much looking forward to that. So just touching upon, briefly scratching the surface of what OriginTrail has already achieved together with the global community of essentially individuals, developers, those running nodes currently in the network. There are over 2,500 nodes which are maintaining data, also receiving certain compensation for that. And most importantly, we also have ecosystem partners such as the British Standards Institution that are building practical applications on top of OriginTrail. And this is, of course, advancing so many things on the pharma supply chains that Courtney is going to touch upon. And just a few examples. This one, again, very near and dear to us. We're helping a distillery out of Ireland that's also supported by Bono of YouTube to essentially trace everything within the production of whiskey from grain to glass. Therefore, living up to their promise of sustainability and giving buyers of whiskey all the information they need about the whiskey. Then another one, we're helping the largest retailers in the United States functioning in a consortium called Supplier Compliance Audit Network to exchange information on audit report. And by doing so, they don't need to repeat audit on the same factory, say from China, and there are around 22,000 factories already in the repository. So they would exchange information amongst themselves, therefore, creating a lot of savings. And the bottom line, of course, is that they are securing imports to the United States. And the third, and I guess the most near and dear to us right now, is the AidTrust. AidTrust essentially is right now on a mission really to help less advantaged people or disadvantaged people from certain geographies to receive medicaments that they really need. So in that particular case that we're going to discuss here is the hemophilia problem. So those patients, if they do not receive the medicine that is intended for those markets, they might even die if it doesn't come not only to the destination, but also if it does not arrive in under specific conditions which are required for such a medicine. And this particular use case, particular solution is going to be scaled not only from the current country, which is where it's being used, from India. It's going to be scaled to 47 countries. Already this year, we are planning to follow the administration of medicine to over 30,000 patients. So that's a huge, huge thing, and a very positive impact that we're creating. And it might seem impossible, but it's already here, like Captain Jean-Luc Picard. He's not our advisor, but we kind of really respect all the cool things that he has done and demonstrated. Things are only impossible until are not, and we're getting there very quickly. So without further ado, Courtney.
Thanks. Thank you, Žiga. Appreciate that. Hand over the clicker.
I'm gonna
switch
sit right here. Yeah. Thank you for keeping it warm.
Well, thanks everyone. I'm honored to be here. Courtney Soulsby. I'm a global director for our healthcare sector team within BSI, British Standards Institution. And as Žiga started to hint at, I'm here to talk about a case study that's really brought OriginTrail to life in a real-life context, and I think a very impactful context. But first, before we get to some of the nuances of the case study, I want to set the landscape of the economic implications. We are at the World Economic Forum, aren't we, anyways? So to make sure that we understand the access to medicine landscape and how that triggers financial investment and multi-stakeholders involved in the supply chains, as Žiga mentioned, accountability, ownership of data, and also the medicines reaching the inpatient is quite complex and ultimately leads to medicines not reaching the patient. So here's the landscape at a broad context. Everyone's heard about the financial investment community really transforming sustainability, and actually how organizations are taking on sustainability programs in a much broader, more robust way. There was a guidance that was produced by the financial investment community to the biopharma industry, who produces these medicines that reach the developing world, that basically asked them to report to the financial investment community about key sustainability initiatives. You'll see here on this slide, 2 of them are directly related to the topic we're talking about today: access to medicine and pricing of those drugs, as well as supply chain management of 2 of the key decision makers that they will use to actually invest in pharmaceutical companies moving forward. How are they actually benchmarking pharmaceutical companies in this context? There's a qualitative index called Access to Medicine Index that ranks pharmaceutical organizations by their levels of contribution of medicines that they donate in order for them to reach the low and middle income countries. This index is the only quantification of how pharma companies are actually doing good in this access to medicine arena. But right now, it's quite qualitative. And as Žiga was mentioning around transforming data and information into assets that actually can be quantifiable for financial investment, that's what we believe AidTrust, this solution, can actually transform the pharmaceuticals' proof of donations reaching in patients through the supply chain traceability that AidTrust provides. And actually, Roche's CEO agrees. There's a quote here from their 21 annual report saying, what does Roche look like in 20 years? They said that the industry, in collaboration with all healthcare stakeholders across the supply chain, must succeed in improving access to healthcare in all parts of the world by better availability of data, and therefore assets to prove financial investment. So that's really the strategic landscape of why this is not just about getting medicines to patients, but actually triggers huge amounts of financial investment to the pharmaceutical industry more broadly. So what is the problem of donated medicines and the supply chain complexities? So there's a few issues that the industry faces when trying to reach the end patient. The first is pharmaceutical companies get tax reliefs for donating medicines. So as you can imagine, pharma are very profit-driven organizations. They essentially throw the donated medicines over a brick wall to the NGO organizations and say, good luck, get those medicines to the patient, thank you very much. And they look to the government and say, we'll take that tax relief for that good charity work that we have done. Which I think there is, to Žiga's point earlier, a higher level of accountability and ownership that the pharma organizations need to have to make sure that they do actually reach the end patients and not just handing them over to the NGO, or at least oversight of the NGO organizations to do so. Also, there's a huge amount of investment happening now in the NGO community. USAID, Global Fund, all of which are providing life-saving medicines to the low and middle income countries. I'm talking in the figures of billions. So over the last 3-year cycle, USAID went from 12 billion in their 3-year annual funds to 16 billion. So huge upswings happening, and all of that money is being invested in supply chain improvements. So trying to actually improve the supply chain in the low and middle income countries to ensure that the medicines do reach the intended beneficiaries or patients. So therefore, the big KPI to see if it's successful is patient utilization. Do they actually receive the drugs at the end point of that supply chain? Believe it or not, there's very little data, therefore very little assets available to actually prove this, again, to the financial investment community. There's a statistic out there that 30 to 40% of medicines entering into the supply chain destined for these countries are being diverted or counterfeited, lost within the supply chain, unable to be found, sold on the black market, and not in the right conditions or under the right protocols. Obviously, quality and temperature diversions. We all heard about COVID vaccines actually being required at -40 degrees Celsius in order to reach the patients. It's really been brought to light, I think, with the COVID vaccine crisis about the chaos that is pharmaceutical distribution. Just again, a statistic to us Westerners, I'll call it. we are around 66% of the world has at least one dose of vaccines from the COVID-19 vaccine. But only 16% of the low and middle income country population has one dose of vaccines. And that is because the supply chain visibility and traceability to get the vaccines through Gavi COVAX's program is not successful at this stage to make sure that they're reaching the patient at the right state and the supply chains are robust enough. So we're talking about a real life problem here of getting the medicines to the vaccine. So the concrete example now through AidTrust. This is a co-founded solution between BSI and OriginTrail, launched to market now. We're working with Gavi COVAX as well as the World Federation of Hemophilia in this context where this is a very simplified version of the supply chain. As Žiga mentioned, it's not a linear supply chain, but a network of supply chains taking hemophilia medicines from distribution centers in the West, going to the main distribution center hub in India, reaching about 25 to 50 treatment centers and ultimately 30,000 patients just in India that are receiving the medicines. The idea of AidTrust, powered by the OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph and the blockchains that to provide that, is taking the product origin information from the manufacturer, the pharmaceutical organization, and tracing that product origin data all the way to the end patient through a scanning application that's then logged into the OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph, but also connecting with warehouse systems along each stage of that chain of custody. And if you imagine what amount of data and asset that can be for an organization, for a pharmaco, for the NGO, or also for the doctors administering the patients, we're really looking to transform just information into assets that achieve proof of concept and financial investment. Some screenshots of what the AidTrust dashboard looks like. So we're not just talking about a theoretical concept here, but real life data transitioning through the AidTrust solution. So here you can see India and all the different treatment centers that have been receiving medicines through this supply chain traceability platform. All of the red flags there are indicators where potentially expired product is being stored, overstock inventory, potentially as well diversion, as in the medicine's not supposed to be in this marketplace. So really key indicators that are starting to pop up so that we're live managing the traceability of these medicines while they reach the patient. Additionally, you can see here the number of vials shipped, the number of vials utilized at a very individual level. That's able to be done in the pharma industry because they already have a digital identifier through serialization driver that happened about 10 years ago in pharma. So there is a lot in a batch number on every medicine pack that transits through the supply chain. That is the digital identifier that backs into the OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph so that we can scan the product throughout the supply chain. There's also stock and inventory, right? So at each stage of the chain of custody, at the main distribution center warehouse, throughout the main treatment centers, and ultimately at an individual patient level, you can see, well, are they overstock capacity? Because if they are, they're not handling the medicines in the right way. They're not in the right cold chain environment, or potentially they're being managed in the car or stored in the car park around the back of the warehouse, which ultimately means the patient's not going to get the right medicine controls that they have in place. And also, interestingly, the other problem of the donated medicine market is a lot of times these big pharma companies donate products that are just about to expire, so near expiration, and get a wonderful tax relief because of it still, but the complexity of getting the medicines all the way to the patient in rural Ghana, for example, or rural Kenya, and the complexities of each of those chain of custody within the supply chain means that often the product will either be damaged, it'll be expired in transit, or potentially a product's been recalled in the midst of this journey in the supply chain. So actually one of the indicators is making sure that we're destroying products that are not fit for purpose for the patient so that they are not being administered in the wrong fashion. So that's another key indicator that is, again, being driven through this AidTrust project. So ultimately, what I think, can you imagine, this is actually an upcoming meeting. We're meeting with WFH and their donor organizations in next month, where we're actually able to transform this information and data into assets to prove to their donating parties that actually they are keeping control of the supply chain and have ownership of the medicines throughout the chain of custody of the supply chain, so that ultimately the pharma organizations will invest and donate more to the NGO organization themselves. And then also, the pharma organization will take that asset of data and information from the OriginTrail AidTrust solution, and they will then be able to, linking it back to our first slide, take it to the financial investment community as a part of their sustainability reports and actually drive tangible quantitative data in relation to the assets that we're creating together, which I think is really transformational. Nevertheless, the medicines are actually reaching the patient. So these are just some of the benefits, ultimately, of this solution coming to light. We're able to have visibility and trust established in the medicines that reach the patient, mitigate some of these diversion and gray market concerns. You have the real-life understanding of whether or not the patient does receive the medicine, and you have that proof through the asset and information that we're creating through the OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph. So my concluding statement, I would say, is that ultimately we're doing purpose-driven work here, allowing medicines to reach patients that are unprecedented in markets that are requiring life-saving medicines like HIV, tuberculosis, COVID vaccines, or hemophilia products like Žiga mentioned. And then the second statement would be that would not be possible without the decentralized nature of the knowledge graph from OriginTrail, which allows for connecting data in a decentralized way across all nodes of the supply chain, so that ultimately traceability, which people talk about loads in supply chain, is real, and that we are actually being able to track that medicine through the supply chain through the knowledge graph. So thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one or two questions, but save any additional questions that you have. Branimir, also from the OriginTrail team, is going to also give a quick presentation, and then we can come back at the end for more questions, because I have several. But let's start with one or two good ones and then come back after Bran's presentation. Anyone have a question? Oh, come on.
Hi. I like the idea of sharing medicine to the third world. So my question is, for example, the AIDS medicine in India is more expensive than in the US. So how can this be? My question is still, how can because we want to bring health to the world, and we make money as well. So it's not match up really for the big pharma companies. So it is really cheaper in India with this system. So for the people to buy medicine, is it really cheaper for them as, for example, here in Europe?
That's an expert question. And with the donated medicine, it's free of charge, right? It's not...
Yeah, it depends on the landscape. So one of the financial pressures, if we go back to, I guess, the very first slide that we had on here, the sustainability reports and investments are asking not just about access, but also pricing. So to your point, those are the two key areas that sustainability reporting is requiring from the financial investment community, because of exactly what you just described, overpricing in developing worlds. So I think they're on an evolution. I think for the first time they have a driver to change now, whereas historically they could price it whatever they want to get whatever margin they wanted in whatever market they wanted. So fully support your comment there. I think it's now changing because there's financial investment pressure in the sustainability arena to change that.
We have one more question, otherwise we can do a quick reset and Branimir can give his additional presentation, and then we can come back with more questions if we have any. Otherwise, thank you both very much, but don't go anywhere. We're going to call you back up in about 15 minutes.
Great. Thanks all. Cheers.
Thank you.